evening, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest. We are live, and we will be podcasting on all the usual networks. First of all, I just want to mention as a bit of a program note that my new book is live today, Red Pill Theory, Cracking the Woke Mind Virus. And by the way, Mike, I credit you with giving me the idea of using the red pill as a title for the book. And that's up and available. There's a link to it on the show. And it became obvious that I'm not going to get a publisher. I think that, I've been somewhat algorithmed. There's going to be information, by the way, coming out this week, covered by the reporter John Solomon, who does a great job, that the FBI and the Department of Justice will be releasing some information about this phenomena of algorithming people who are not politically correct. And I'm sure that I'm one of them, because the last time I wrote a book, I asked Amazon, who published it, I wanted to spend a little bit of money promoting it through the Amazon system. And they said, no, you can't do that with us. So that let me know that that's, to me, evidence enough that I'm being algorithmed.
Well, what's crazy about that is, taking the most left-wing perspective I can think of, looking at your work, there's a hell of a lot of people worse than you.
Well, they might be algorithm too. I don't know. This is there's a big wall, and people are put behind it. You're not outright censored. You're mildly censored. I was able to publish it, and I was able to post it on my social network, and I'll probably do some interviews. I don't know, but I forge forward. The book is now available. So, in fact, I think that if someone is watching, usually Amazon gives the first 10 ebooks free. So if you want to run in and get it, you get it for free. We should talk about the most important story right now in the world, which is the war.
Yeah.
I think from what my sources tell me that the war is practically over. The United States has won it.
I think the only thing remaining is them trying to screw up the Straits of Hormuz.
Right. Which, by the way, they sent out 12 ships, according to my sources, which are normie sources. I don't have any deep, to put mines into the Persian Gulf, and all 12 of the ships were sunk by the U.S. Navy. Now, that's according to, again, my sources. They were able to get off a few missiles, one of which hit the international airport in Bahrain. And I think another one hit Iraq. And so, they're trying at this point to interrupt the flow of oil in the Persian Gulf. There is talk about the Israelis and the U.S. occupying the island of Kark, which is off the coast of the Persian Gulf, and which apparently is the site by which about 90% of the Iranian oil flows through to get to the market. Now, if the Iranians want to blow up their own, reserves there, then they're going to be screwing themselves. But either way, if the U.S. Yeah. I think if the United States occupies that island, or if Israel does, then that could bring the regime further on the road to compromise. Now, it seems like, who knows what to believe? I'm watching, could be propaganda videos, but there were videos showing that Iranians are jamming the streets of Tehran in support of the Ayatollah regime. The Ayatollah himself, the son of the Khamenei, he hasn't been seen publicly. There's probably, he's either dead or he's in a coma or something. There's been no evidence that he's alive. And, I think that to just, I don't know, I suppose that if the Iranians want to keep that miserable regime, it's a sad thing. It'll be a setback, but they can stew in their own juices, because the fact of the matter is that Iran will never again pose as a threat to its neighbors. That is really should be the main objective. If the regime falls, great. But President Trump has proven not to be a neocon who wants to go in and rebuild nations like Clinton tried to do in Somalia, or Bush tried to do in Somalia.
Yeah, that worked out well.
Yeah, or they tried to do in Afghanistan and Iraq. It did not work well, obviously. And so um, Trump's position, I mean, he showed this in Venezuela, where he took out Maduro, but he left the rest of the infrastructure in place, didn't try to go in with boots on the ground, didn't try to change the regime, worked with the people that were there, as horrible as they are, as long as they were willing to end the war against the United States and cooperate with the United States.
Well, of course, in the background, Chuck, is the threat, obviously. You know, if you don't play ball, we could come back.
Exactly. And it's Teddy Roosevelt referred to it as walk softly and carry a big stick.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's kind of like we're going to, we're going to do it again if we have to, but we're not going to go in and internally try to rearrange the deck chairs in your country. You have to do it yourself. Trump has been very clear about that with Iran. And again, I mean, it's sort of like the same thing with Hamas control over Gaza. The peace plan was that they were to give up arms as point number 2. Obviously, they're not going to do it, so fine. They'll sit there, and the poor people who are living there will suffer, and they'll hold on to that miserable little strip of beach. Israel basically occupies, I think, about 70% of it. And, their military will no longer be a threat to Israel, so they can hold on to it forever. Who cares? It's too bad. It's sad. But if that's what they want to do, fine. And the same thing is true with Iran. As long as they are no longer a threat to the United States and to the Abraham Accord alliance, then they can just sit there and rot if that's what the people in that country want. If they're that radical.
Well, I don't think that's what they want. I mean, there are always going to be people that legitimately are in favor of the Ayatollah regime. There are going to be people that are paid to demonstrate in favor of it. But there's no way that can be a popularly supported regime based on the simple fact that they killed thousands of their own people who were just starting to protest.
Well, maybe they took out all of the real leaders in the opposition. I mean, it's sort of like, there were people who supported the Hitler regime, but the United States, of course, took the stand, which we're not doing now and shouldn't do, and of which FDR, repeating the famous statement made by Ulysses Grant about the Southern insurrection, that we'd accept nothing less than unconditional surrender. I know Trump recently said that, but that's not going to. I don't think that's going to be the approach. I think the approach might be similar to that of the Soviet Union, which was the policy of containment. George Kennan wrote about an article in Foreign Affairs in 1947 or 48, laying out the containment strategy, which is that the Soviet Union will be defeated simply by surrounding it with Western-minded, more democratic allies, propaganda, using Radio Free Europe and, to send in and show them how miserable they are. And eventually they'll collapse. And that's exactly what happened.
Right.
I think that's probably the best. Right. I mean, that's the best approach. Iran has been abandoned, apparently, by allies that they were expecting, like China and Russia. They don't really have any friends. They don't really have much left in terms of, military hardware. But, if they want to hang on, I suppose that, again, it's an issue of containment. Now I'm listening to the other side. Earlier today, I listened to a podcast with E. Michael Jones. He's like salivating over the possibility of Israel being destroyed. It's horrible. And he's publicly praying that God redeems the world by destroying Israel. I mean, I've never heard anyone like that. It seems to be kind of anti-Catholic, frankly.
Well,
do.
of course it is, but again, the problem with him is that he chose a road to go down, and he just continues because, turning back, he'd have to admit that he was an imbecile, and he's not going to do that.
Yeah.
So with the same thing, by the way, is happening with the left, who are apparently in support of the mullahs.
They are, and quite openly. And I mean, not just E. Michael Jones, but I've seen some other left wingers on Twitter do the same thing, where they're saying, well, Israel is now being pounded by missiles. Tel Aviv is inflamed. It's, there's fire, the people are being killed, the real dire images. Now, Israel has sustained some missiles, but I don't believe that they're telling the truth. I just don't see. I mean, and the Israelis, they're kind of, used to it at this point, unfortunately. They understand that they have to suffer a couple of attacks now in order to stop the bigger attacks later. People like Michael Jones is openly praying and claiming that Iran has these supersonic missiles and the Shahib. My understanding is that they've been destroyed or they've been trapped underground by U.S. bunker busters. The United States is flying B-52s from an air base in Missouri, Whitman Air Base. This is public. Right. It's amazing, over half the world, they're refueling in flight, where they're going to Iran and they are dropping 2,000-pound bombs on these sites. And the result is these bombs can go underground and destroy what Iran was building, which was this massive underground empire that would make Hamas look like kindergarten compared. And pretty much about probably 85% of it has been not like literally destroyed, but made inoperable by destroying the ability of the door. Everybody's locked in. And the goal is not only to destroy these sites, but to make them so damaged that they'll never again be able to be rebuilt. I mean, and I believe that, again, I don't know. My sources are just the usual conventional sources. So I really don't know what to believe. Maybe this is all not, this could also be just as big a propaganda.
No, I don't think so, because you have to realize that the conventional sources, as you call them, are essentially all left-wing, anti-American. So anything positive is probably going to be an understatement of what's actually going on. Right. But, I immediately thought of a corollary to the Iranian Ayatollahs are finished. The left is finished. I mean, for them to brazenly and openly take a completely anti-American stance on this, go for it, right? Go for it. Same thing with Hollywood.
I mean,
the Hollywood idiots are all coming out against this, and it's like a statement I made up when I was in college. The worse it gets, the worse it gets. Hollywood is going down the toilet, but I guess they have to make it even worse by taking this sort of point of view.
Right.
I'm telling you, the moguls are spinning in their graves about what happened to what they created. If you look at this latest Maggie Gyllenhaal, The Bride movie, which is a total flop, financial disaster. I joked on the forum a couple of days ago. I said, say what you want about the moguls, but they made money. They forgot how to make money in Hollywood.
I know.
What's the point? Other than, it's a big point, I guess, other than the catalog of Warner Brothers, what are you buying? They haven't made a profitable movie.
On the subject of that, how could it be that, which was the company that bought that catalog? I mean, they bought like the Warner Brothers archive and a couple of other things.
Oh, Paramount.
And they spent, what was it, like $200 billion first of all, where did they come up with that kind of money? And secondly, how does, I mean, maybe this is ignorant on my part, I'll grant you, but I don't understand how an old movie can make a return.
Well, let me tell you that the main problem with the entertainment business is that, and this is historic, by the way, they're always living in the past, always against anything technical improvement.
Right.
Okay, the people in the industry were against sound when it came out. I mean, you can seriously, you can go back to anything. So the other thing is, they have a fantasy notion of the value of the catalog. All right. I mean, when you come right down to it, there's so much bootleg already of the catalog.
I know. How do you control it now? I mean,
well, you don't control it. And the problem is, if you were to, this is a standard thing you see in the music industry all the time. Yeah, music publisher would have in their catalog some hits, a few dozen hits that are worth something in royalties, for a long period of time.
Right.
But maybe that's 5 to 10%.
Yeah, but even the biggest hit, it doesn't go on like that forever. It gradually loses relevance over time. I mean, yeah, what are they going to do? Bring back "It's a Wonderful Life"? I mean, it's sort of, I just don't get where the money, how they can, just from a strictly budget standpoint. What are they thinking? I mean,
what they're thinking is they're thinking it's still 1950, all right? That after a while, Casablanca, for example, isn't going to be quite as popular.
No,
as maybe it was. So, which is okay, Chuck. But if you don't have anything new that anybody likes, how the hell are you worth $200 billion?
Well, that's what I don't get. And how do they come up? Who's coughing up that kind of dough anyway? I mean, it's crazy. That's like more money than, most nations have as the gross national.
Well, Paramount is deeply in debt. They're going to be more deeply in debt. The other thing is that it's much easier to raise billions of dollars than it is to raise a few 100,000, right? There's something in the banking industry where they always get very excited. Oh boy, I'm working with the entertainment industry. But at the end of the day, where's the money?
Exactly. Something is going to have to, businesses go out of business when they do this sort of thing. They expand. We could look at certain department stores that did this. Or restaurant chains that decided, we're going to take over. Howard Johnson's is going to create a new restaurant, the Ground Round. They expanded so quickly that the whole thing went out of business. And we ended up losing a great legacy restaurant. I mean, the Howard Johnson.
What happens is they believe their own BS, right?
Yeah.
This is great because we say it's great, and a room is full of people agreeing with us.
It's an issue of greed, and it's an issue of maybe just losing their bearings in terms of their sense of inevitability, of like infallibility. And you could look at so many examples where these big, look at something, Sears Roebuck. Whoever thought they'd go out of business? But they just lost touch with they didn't keep up with the times. Woolworths.
I think that's being nice. Yeah.
So I'm just saying that this whole, capital, I don't know. It's like, it could be another dinosaur, except in that case, it's such a big company that a collapse like that could really affect the whole economy. But we'll see. Anyway, back to a less pleasant.
I think what's going to happen in entertainment, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, because with the advent of streaming platforms, you can do this stuff a lot cheaper. All right. And they're just not very smart. Okay. Yeah, they'll have hits, but everybody forgets, even when it was a different landscape, you only remember the hits. Yeah, you remember Casablanca, but there's probably a lot of other movies from 1942 that sucked that you don't remember.
But even the good movies, you're not going to keep. Can you keep going back and see it? I know there's a couple of movies that I've seen a couple of times because it's sort of I like, you just get into it, but very few. And even then, I mean, over time, it sort of starts to.
Well, here's the thing too, and I keep using Casablanca as an example. All right, you and I are old enough to, even though we didn't personally live through World War II,
right.
We certainly heard about it from our parents all the time. So the thing is, if you were born in 2010, yeah, you know about World War II, but you know what? You don't really care about a black and white movie.
Exactly.
With kind of a very odd premise.
Yeah.
And it
becomes dated, even if it's just not relevant to to modern sensibilities. So anyway, it's just, when I saw that, it's like, what kind of dumb thing? I mean, it's like, it's colossally wasteful.
It's sort of Emperor's New Clothes. I mean, how could you, if you were in the boardroom at Paramount, think, this really isn't worth that much. But remember, Paramount is also in the movie business. So they'd have to look in the mirror and say, hey, you know what? It ain't 1930 anymore. But it's very hard for people to do that in these legacy businesses. They just don't get it. And you mentioned Howard Johnson's and Ground Round.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the big expansion of Starbucks? Any of these places that have to retrench, you've got to be realistic, and people don't often want to be. Because, gee, I made a few bucks, so I must be the smartest guy in the world. But it isn't that simple, apparently. And say what you want about Netflix, at least they backed off. Hey, the bidding got so high on this thing, forget it.
Anyways, I mean, to go back to the unpleasant topic of the Iran war.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to see the United States get involved in a quagmire. I don't want to see the United States get involved with a situation with boots on the ground. I don't want to see the loss of American lives. President Trump said it would be quick, but there he is getting into a war. But I still support the goals of the war. It's a civilizational matter. Trump is the first president who has had the guts to take on radical Islamic terrorist regimes, and Iran is the epicenter of that. People like E. Michael Jones, they say, well, Iran is being attacked. No, it's the mullahs that took over Iran. Iran is a great civilization. It's a great, going way back to Cyrus the Great.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, recognized Israel and freed the Jews to go back home and rebuild their temple. And it's one of the world's great cultures that was seized by radical Muslims who came out of Arabia, and again seized by radical Muslims under Khomeini. Well, I think it was backed by the Soviets, backed by, apparently they have a lot of financial properties. The British have these big real estate properties in London. I mean, they're an internationally connected radical group.
Well, the British, to be honest, were really the ones that were friends of the mullahs from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
And you have to look at the whole character of the Brits. Look at what's happening to them now, how they voluntarily decided to ruin their own country. There's just something about that temperament that went off the rails.
Very destructive.
Pretty much when World War II ended, I mean, I'm not 100% pro-Churchill guy, but wasn't it interesting that as soon as the war is over, they voted his ass out.
Right.
And there's just something about that culture that is self-destructive, and I think deep down they know it. It was explained to me a long time ago that there's three elements that I can only remember two of them that were very important in British culture. One was the old school ties. The other one was a very extensive homosexual network.
Right.
And
by the way.
Well, and then the joke was that Kim Philby checked off all three boxes. Right. But
I think that whole rotten core of people did. I mean, and the Soviets knew how to exploit that. You know, they would always find the weak point in any society. You know, and then they would go in for the kill.
Well, they were very good at that. It was Stalin, by the way, that got homosexual men into the seminaries in the U.S. So
wasn't there? I mean, I think that I read a book about that years ago, and I interviewed the author. It was called "Good Men" something. I mean, what was it? Rose, I believe the author's name was, and he talked about how the seminaries, the Catholic seminaries, in the 1960s were subverted by these sort of people posing as therapists, kind of a new age thing. This
something like Goodbye, Good Men.
Goodbye, Good Men. Yeah, Maslow Rogers. I mean, it was these group of therapists that went in. They sort of normalized the sexual revolution and the counterculture, and they began a process basically of subverting the American Catholic Church and probably other countries as well. And I wouldn't be surprised because the Protestants already were, subverted by the communists. The National Council of Churches, you and I have read about this in None Dare Call It Treason. John Stormer gets into this, pretty extensively. Who's it? This guy, the Red Dean, I forget his name. And they basically, after World War II, the humanists, so-called, under UNESCO, who was that? It was his name, Huxley, Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother, began to an agenda of internationalizing and taking over all religions by basically the idea was that they would leave in place the trappings, the visuals, the beautiful church and the stained glass and the incense and the priest with the wonderful vestments and the rituals. They did the same thing to Judaism, except Judaism fell a lot quicker, and the Protestants had no problem. They were already gone, but they would exchange the actual beliefs with leftist secular agendas. It was no longer a belief in an eternal creator of the universe who was outside of the manipulation of people, and who create, and that man is created in God's image, and that we have a limited sovereignty under God, and many of the principles that make up the Western Judeo-Christian ideals. It subverted that while people thought that it was all fine, and because they had a function where they could mark important moments in your life, obviously birth, marriage, bar mitzvah, death, whatever. But the actual substance of it was stripped away. Whereas I think that the Catholic Church resisted this in a way that was much more, and I think it had a lot to do with the church having this great hierarchy, with the Pope and the cardinals and the bishops, and the idea of subsidiarity, but yet kind of a central theme that transcended everything. It was even in the form of architecture and beauty, that there's a certain look that the Catholic Church, a brand, I guess you might say, that goes back thousand years, that it couldn't be easily subverted. But they've gone a ways, and we're talking about introducing sex education to seminarians. What do they need sex education for? It's like, what? Is that why they went to the seminary? but somehow they were able to get their nose under the proverbial camel's tent and get this done to an extent. Although I still think that the Catholic Church remains a great moral arbiter in the world, and much more so than other religions. But what happened to the Catholic Crusades, by the way? I should ask Michael Jones this. Whatever happened to the spirit of standing up to radical Islam, starting with Pope Urban, who organized the first crusade to try to save Christian nations from this encroaching invasion by this completely alien sect?
That's where Jones couldn't answer you, because he got so down the road on the anti-Semitism that it clouded every position.
Everything
that sort of thing happened, ironically, with people who were smarter. Michael Hoffman was the same way, and just went so far off the deep end. They're not going to come back. I mean, because they'd have to, condemn everything they've done for the last 25 years.
It's a powerful, easy kind of an agenda. It's very developed. Joe Sobrin's another one, whom I interviewed back in the day. I wish I still had a tape of it. He's a brilliant guy. I mean, great columnist. And he, toward the end of his life, he went way down into the anti-Semitic, path. I mean, the to use Dr. Michael Jones's term, category of the mind. That it's just.
Well, he was really a sad case, because what happened to him was similar to St. Francis, who didn't have quite the following, and St. Francis became, let's say, sympathetic to white supremacists, and it was too bad. I mean, evidently he was convinced that most of his followers were on that side. As Sobrin, probably what happened is he wrote one or two columns that were critical of Israel, and then he got a lot of good email, and he figured, gee, we better do more of this.
Yeah, this is like I'm getting likes and hits, and I get that. I mean, it's people can, they can sell out to that. It's very alluring.
You really shouldn't, because if you're, the only reason you would do that is if you had written some sort of general column that never really offended anybody. And maybe people like the way I'm talking about the WNB, or even that would offend people, but some relatively benign subject. But if you look at it and say, gee, I wrote this anti-Semitic column, and now I'm getting good email.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a good idea.
No, but I mean, I mean, certainly whenever you go that road, people start just coming out of the woodwork. They all, especially every time Israel is attacked or Jews are killed, they all come out of the woodwork, and it's like it's like a field day. It's very, very interesting and quite.
Well, Sobrin's problem too was that just the fact that he was an arch conservative, he was getting dropped from a lot of newspapers. So he figured, gee, maybe I'm going to hang my hat on this, but I think it was foolish. And
it was, and I think that maybe he was starting to get narrower in his following. I know that I saw him as the keynote speaker at a John Birch Society dinner in Boston.
Yeah,
this was like in the 90s, sometime around then. It was before he had gone into this diatribe, and when he did, I was really quite shocked, and I challenged him on it, and we went back and forth about it. But he was very much into it, and that's what he went into. Think of a few other people like that too. But the present war that against Iran, it really, I believe, it is to liberate the Iranians from the grip of this radical gang of camel jockeys these Islamic mullahs who are not consistent with the great elements of Iranian culture. Now, I'm not going to say that the Shah Pahlavi was any great sheikhs either, but at least it was moving in the right direction in terms of Iran taking its place in the concert of the nations of the world as an important civilization, and they just completely lost that. I think there was an agenda there, probably by who knows who, the establishment. This amorphous. I don't want to put on too much of a tin hat here, but who knows who is backing him? But I don't believe that people willingly go into something that extreme. And then, of course, once he was enthroned, they began exporting their revolution in complete cooperation with the international left.
Yeah.
And it sort of was the left got a new lease on life with them. And I think that, to my way of thinking, if Iran can be liberated from this, then and the conditions really are simple, that Iran can maintain their own government, but they have to conform to the Abrahamic Accords. They don't have to join the Abraham Accords. It would be great if they did, but the Abraham Accords is an alliance between Israel, several Arab countries and Muslim countries, and the United States. That's what it is, and it's really a political bloc, and it's simply meeting. Again, if Iran plays ball with them, then they can experience full sovereignty and live in peace. But if they're going to continue to make war with their neighbors, and they're going to continue to bomb the Abraham Accord nations, which is what they're doing, then they're going to have to expect that there's going to be a battle. And that battle, I think, constitutes what St. Thomas Aquinas called the just war.
Yeah.
I think it meets that standard. So, it's Trump is part of this international movement that is rejecting the globalist, world-conquering type agendas that the Iranian mullahs are all about, and that certainly the Anglo-American establishment has been all about, which is why they despise Trump. But it's going in that direction, and they're not going to be able to stop it. Look at the Western Hemisphere. In the past 2 years, several nations have elected conservative leaders that are very similar to Trump.
Also known as far right.
Oh, yeah, right, sure. Yeah. Argentina, we know about with Milei, but also now Chile has the most conservative leader since Pinochet stood for election, by the way, and he lost and stepped down. He was not a dictator. Well, he started out as one, but he changed the country for the better. We could go into that, but let's put that aside. Now also Ecuador, Bolivia, I believe Peru, and then in Central America, you got Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama. All of these nations, Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, now that Maduro's been taken out at Venezuela, they still have a liberal left government, but the point is they're completely cooperating with this alliance. They are turning their oil over to the United States instead of Iran and China. You have in Brazil election coming up where Bolsonaro's son apparently is way ahead, and I hope he frees his father from political prison. I'm sure he will. And I just think, and now Cuba, Marco Rubio is over there making giving them an offer, basically saying either you can step down, that being the Castro family and their puppet, this guy Canel. We will let you stay there, or we're going to treat you like Maduro. And I think that it's only a matter of time, probably a matter of maybe weeks, if not maybe a few months, before that miserable communist regime collapses and they step down. And that's going to be a glorious moment.
Okay, well, then do the contrast for me as to why it was somehow acceptable to have the Castros in power since 1959. And that was considered the diplomatic whatever.
So now the international liberal leaning establishment. I read a book about this years ago. I forget the author. He was Cuban, and he talks about how people in the State Department, same characters who sold out China. This guy William Wyland, I think, is Assistant Secretary of State under Eisenhower, and also this New York Times reporter Herbert Matthews, who wrote glowing articles. Fidel Castro is the next Abraham Lincoln. He's like, this kind of propaganda. After having gone over to meet his ragtag group in the mountains, I mean, they had nothing. All of a sudden, they're being propped up and money's pouring in. Milton Eisenhower's brother was part of it. They basically put Castro in power, and I think
to what end, though? I mean,
what end did they put Mao Zedong? I mean, they sold out Chiang Kai-shek, our ally, you had a communist inside the FDR Department of the Treasury named Harry Dexter White, the same guy who masterminded the Morgenthau plan, by the way, who, he kind of shorted promised gold to help, because don't forget, China bore the brunt of the Pacific Theater in World War II.
Okay, but has anybody written a book about what was happening at the time? You can talk about Joe McCarthy after the war going after these guys, but what about people surrounding Milton Eisenhower and the rest of them?
They had completely infiltrated the government, just like what Joe McCarthy said. They, right before the end of the war, there was a big scandal with the so-called Institute of Pacific Affairs, which was shut down, and you had all these big wigs, what McCarthy called, the striped pants and the starched shirts, people that are like Alger Hiss. They're basically the China hands, they called them. They were working to help enthrone Mao and undermine Chiang, our ally, in any way possible, with smears and lies and, promising him military aid, which never showed up, promising gold so that he could, basically inflate his currency in order to pay for a war that he basically practically fought single-handedly, and then shorting him the gold so they couldn't back the currency, which made the money worthless, and other kind of tricks, until they basically, they had, Japanese military hardware that they were going to deliver to Chiang. Instead, it ended up being dropped into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
There's some stories around that are unbelievable. And George C. Marshall, who would become Secretary of State, he was kind of a desk general in Washington. He went and basically was dictator of China for about a year, just like MacArthur was in Japan, except MacArthur did a good job.
Yeah.
Whereas Marshall basically stabbed Chiang in the back in every way he could. Oh, you're going to compromise with Mao. And this was at a time when Chiang was winning. And he kept, the ceasefire and let Mao move up.
I'm thinking that the reason that this didn't come out the way it should was that the media, people in charge, felt that this war was so terrible and the people were so fatigued by it that even though the mood in the 1950s was, hey, we won the war and lost the peace, but as long as gas is cheap, there's full employment. But I think Joe McCarthy made people face a lot of stuff they didn't want to face.
McCarthy actually came to the game even a little late, but
yeah, he did.
After 1945 and the collapse of the Nazi regime, the United States was revered all over the world as the deliverer, as standing up for national sovereignty and and freedom. And we basically frittered it away because of these people operating inside the government. It wouldn't have taken a lot. We didn't have to fight wars. It wouldn't have taken much to, I mean, George Patton wanted to go on to Moscow, and he's listed in my book of questionable deaths, my assassination book.
Oh,
I
for
mean,
sure.
it was very strange what happened to Patton. But anybody who basically kind of challenged this agenda was disappeared. Let's put it that way. And the result was this dialectical war between these two sides. I'm trying to think. This again is John Stormer's "None Dare Call It Treason." Um, it was the head of either the Ford Foundation, Rowan Gaither, I believe his name was, when the Reese Committee was investigating. It's one of those great committees that people don't know that much about, the role of foundations in the establishment of this left-wing international agenda. He interviewed Rowan Gaither, who was the head of the Ford Foundation, and Rowan Gaither told him honestly, he goes, the agenda that we are financing and we have been financing since World War One is an agenda called convergence. And convergence is when the Soviet Union and their communist satellites move a little bit toward the center, and the United States and its democratic allies, they move a little toward the center. Eventually, they find a middle and they converge to create a world order that they both become the same. This was also the philosophy of Mussolini, the third way. Mussolini was a Bolshevik who, a college radical who realized that Italy wasn't going to fall to a Bolshevik revolution, which is what he was started out as, because Italy, number one, it was too Catholic, and number two, it had too many small business owners, too many small farmers, people who aren't going to play ball, with that kind of radical movement. So he came up with the third way. It's called fascism.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of, communism and a little bit of capitalism, all kind of brought together so that you have the appearance of freedom. Like the way the United States has an elected Congress, not fascist Italy had a council of corporations.
Well, on that subject, was the way Giovanni Gentile originated fascism. Did he envision it as this sort of smokescreen as well?
I don't know if he's the one who came up with the term "the third way," which, by the way, was popularized in this country by the Clintons.
Yeah.
But the idea was ultimately, Italy would go communist, but it couldn't happen for they take a long view. I mean, we're talking the long march that Gramsci talked about through the institutions. It had to have been done piecemeal, and it's like the way we were talking about earlier. UNESCO took over religions. Leave in place the trappings. People think they feel fine, everything's good. We have, holidays, blah, blah, blah. But you move in, there are other movements that have done this. The Fabians of England, right? Their logo actually is a wolf in sheep's clothing. They set up an organization in the United States called the ACLU.
Yeah.
And what the ACLU did, and their founder was an open communist, I forget his name now.
Roger Baldwin.
Thank you. Was they would take words and give them new meanings. Leave the word in place. The Constitution still says what it says. The Declaration of Independence, it all says what it says. But the words would take on a different meaning under the law. And they would test this through the judiciary by basically getting up the rat line and into positions of judgeships, their people, who would then go in and reinterpret words to mean what the Fabians wanted them to mean, as opposed to what they actually do mean. And to try to counter that, that's why it's important to understand linguistics and to understand the etymology of words, what they really are and what they mean, as opposed to what they've been perverted to mean by people who have an agenda. Because there are concepts, there are, categories of the mind, like E. Michael Jones likes to say, that have taken on meaning because over trial and error from thousands of years, that you shouldn't that have to really be identified at their source, rather than let the Fabians and the radicals switch them around and fool us. Anyways, I don't know how we got on that, but
no, it's very interesting though. That should really be your next book.
Well, now that I have this one in the can, ironically, next week is, I'm a student at Arizona State University, getting a degree in sociology with a minor in history. Next week, I'm starting my next course, and it's going to be on the history of Islam. Now, I don't know if it's going to be one of these sort of whitewashes. I have a feeling it is. But either way, I have a feeling that I'm probably going to ultimately turn that into a book. Speaking of that, I don't know if you're following this story in Texas, where the people of Texas have voted overwhelmingly to ban Sharia law in Texas. And I was listening to an interview with one of the leaders of this movement. She was on with Steve Bannon, who, by the way, I highly recommend. It's an excellent program. And she actually read some of the principles that they're introducing into the schools. And it was being introduced by this group called CARE, which has been apparently affiliated with Hamas, and it's a radical group, and it has been named as such going back a decade. This is new. And they want to teach, Islam in the schools in a way that they've said, number one, that they have to get rid of Columbus. They have to get rid of Thanksgiving. They want to de-emphasize the Declaration of Independence. The Alamo, apparently, is a Muslim symbol because it's modeled after a Muslim mosque. That the slaves, the black slaves brought to the United States were predominantly Muslims. They don't get into the fact that it was the Muslims who were the big slavers in Africa, but putting that aside, there's all this new, this kind of revisionist history that somehow implicates Islam into American history. Now, look, Islam, for better or for worse, it was not a major part of American history. It just wasn't. It's only been recently that we have Muslims, even in this country, quite frankly. I mean,
there were interactions with him going back to the Barbary pirates.
Oh yeah, well, that's something that, right. I mean, if they really want to talk about American Islamic history, we could talk about that. I mean, Jefferson had a Quran. Yeah, he had a Quran because he was fighting the Barbary pirates, and he wanted to understand, what they were, who they were, and what they were thinking. Not because he was an admirer. But anyway, I'll be getting into that in my new course, and it's going to be interesting. Look, I mean, I think that there are peaceful Islamic nations in the world, and I'm glad that there is the Abraham Accords, quite frankly, and I think there's been progress made. The Central Asian Islamic states tend to be peaceful. Even Mauritania, which is in Africa, one of the most Islamic countries in the world, 98% Muslim, and apparently they still have slavery.
Yeah.
But yet they recognize Israel and they have a normal relations with Israel. Figure that out. I'm saying that it's not that I'm totally negative about this. There is a possibility of having, I believe, positive, productive, normal relations with Islamic countries. What I don't understand, frankly, and I know this may seem politically incorrect, is why it is that the United States or Europe needs to have Muslims come here. I don't get that. Islamic countries span about 20% of the surface of this planet. They stretch all the way from the Atlantic seaboard in Senegal all the way to the South Pacific. They go to the reaches of Siberia, which is getting near the North Pole, all the way south to the coast of South Africa, where they have the Comoro Islands. What do they need to come to the, what is the purpose? Why would, it's a different culture. I mean, for better or for worse, that's their culture, and they can have that culture. No one's interfering with the sovereignty of those countries. Why is it that Germany and France and Britain and Scandinavia and the United States, why are we allowing mass immigration from those countries? It doesn't
I think it's fairly simple. It's self-hatred and atheism. And the fact that and environmentalism had a little bit to do with it too. You were probably very young in the 1960s, but it was pounded in our head, the population bomb and too much reproduction and so on.
Ehrlich, right? That by the year, a certain year.
Okay, so the idea was, and there were people, as there always are, who were true believers. Ehrlich was a maniac.
Right.
He was wrong about everything, but his success was based on the fact that that generation, which preceded mine a little bit, was just full of self-loathing. And this tied in with so-called feminism, anti-natalist. So then what happened is all these left-wing leaders of these large countries, including Britain, United States, suddenly looked at the finances and saw, gee, we're not going to be able to pay for all the pensions of all these people.
Yeah.
So we need immigration.
I mentioned to you that that's what Pete Peterson, the former chairman of the New York Federal Reserve, said on my show. I wish I had a tape of that. That
there were people
losing
besides him that were talking about this at the time, but this whole green movement and the rise in academia, the people, like they do now with global warming, people really believe this stuff. And I think it has to do with kind of being too well off, right? We're only separated by a few generations for when you had to go out there and work the land or you starved to death. Right. Now, the hardest anybody seems to work is you're in an office doing paperwork with a computer, okay?
Right.
So
not producing anything.
So the thing now is that you have a distorted worldview, and naturally, if you open up immigration based on the work of Teddy Kennedy and a few other Democratic senators,
right, 1965, yep.
You're going to bring in people with a different worldview, and this was noticed in Britain from day one, but you couldn't speak of it. None dare call it treason, right? And suddenly you have a situation where the percent of white Britons in the city of London is now 30% compared to well over 90 less than a generation ago. So It was purposeful, it was evil, and now they're reaping the whirlwind.
Exactly, and they yet cannot really explain why this is a virtuous policy. I mean, Muslims live in some of the wealthiest countries in the world. I mean, Saudi Arabia, I mean, they're sitting on what percentage of the world's oil reserves? These are vast countries with huge populations, brilliant people. I mean, great resources. Why is it a virtue to have them all move to London? Why is that something we're supposed to look at? And if we criticize that, because we're bigoted. No, I don't. I mean, look, first of all, I don't want to see any mass group move to the United States right now. I don't want to see, I'd be against Norwegians coming here en masse. I just don't think we need to have a huge influx of immigrants right now. We need to take care of the people that have come here illegally, and we need to help get Americans back to what they do. So
Well,
it's
we
not,
got to get the birth rate up
yeah,
of the people here, and it. There are other political aspects of it that you couldn't really change America if you had what used to be Americans here. If we bring in a bunch of immigrants, we can change the country, get our power base, whatever it is. It's sad, and I don't see a real good fix for it because the political system, by its very nature, is extremely corrupt. And as I tell my friends, fine, you can go to DC, you can find 5% of the senators and congressmen are worthwhile individuals. But you know what? Why are you there? Why are you there? Would you like to be in an environment where 95% of the people sucked? How would you even deal with that?
it's very discouraging and it's very corrupt. And we could do a whole show, and probably will, on just, maybe it's a natural thing, but there's a corrupt side to our entire society. It operates on dishonesty and kind of under the table, whether it be stealing all this social service money from working people, whether it be bringing in illegal aliens to undercut American labor, whether it be bringing in voting machines to control, the vote and to undercut voters by leaving in place these rotten Democrat-run cities. This isn't new. I mean, the book "The Last Hurrah" by O'Connor he published that in the 60s. That talks about Boston in the 1950s under James Michael Curley. The whole book is about election stealing. It's a brilliant book, by the way, and how the wards would get the guy elected. And how
Curley was well liked, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he was, but he was pretty. He was, by today's standards, he was. He was. I know that, like, my grandparents looked at him as like a hero, mainly because they were poor immigrants, and they were like, oh, he was like this champion. These guys, this is a demagoguery. That they're going to help the little guy. Going to help the poor.
Right.
But it was very. He ran these ward, machines that really started the ball rolling in terms of he was elected while he was in prison.
Yeah.
Interesting man, by the way. But he was fine compared to people are out there now. It's become so institutionalized. I think he actually.
Would you rather have James Curley, or who's your current mayor now?
Michelle Wu? Yes,
Yeah.
I'd rather have James Curley.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. By today's standards, Curley's a saint. And he took a few bucks on the side. But the point is, he actually did mean well. But I think that he did set up this paradigm by which you had these machine, wards that would crank out votes and would control cities. And that's why we have cities like Detroit and Newark and Chicago, where you have just and they're supposed to represent black people. No, they get a couple of paid off black faces to put up in the front and to look right, but they were screwing black people, still are. It's just it's sad. Anyways, as we wrap it up, I just want to again mention that my new book is available at Amazon.
And what's the title again?
The title of the book is Red Pilled Social Theory: Cracking the Woke Mind Virus. This is conservative social theory. I'm a sociologist, and I want to see conservative social theory take its rightful place in the canon of sociology. I believe sociology is a very important social science. It really opens the door on looking at society and at people's behavior in society and movements in society and what makes them tick. It's actually quite fascinating.
How many conservative sociologists are
there? Very few, if any. They've been drummed out, and unfortunately, sociology, not that it probably always wasn't anyway, but it's become and is a handmaiden of the radical left. and I've seen it firsthand with my studies at ASU, which I document in my book. Anyways, so the book is available online and as a soft cover or as an ebook. Red Pill Social Theory: Cracking the Woke Mind Virus. Check out the cover and tell me if you know everyone on that cover and why I put them there. Anyways, Mike,
right.
coming up on the Substack or?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of ideas, but I'm going to order this book because maybe you'll be the new conservative sociologist, change the entire field.
I mean, I'll do a small part to just maybe open the door to it. I just would like to see, because sociology is such an important social science, that I want to see it have some balance. I've got nothing against left-wing sociologists. I just want to see them balanced by a couple of right-wing sociologists, so we can have a genuine, legitimate social science that really takes a full and more broad look at society and does its job. I mean, there's a reason why colleges are now dropping sociology departments. BU just is no longer offering sociology as a degree. I mean, is my understanding, because young people don't want to do it because it's become nothing but a soapbox. It's not worth. It's losing value. So I would humbly suggest that I'm trying to save sociology.
You're going to save the field.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Mike. Thanks as always for joining me.